morning, everyone. So we're going to go over timesheets and how the report works and how timesheets can be prepared, ready to send over to your accounting platforms that you're using. So I guess that's probably where I would start is sort of a bit of an explanation or an overview of the accounting platforms that we export to. So we do export to Xero. That's probably our most popular integration. We also export to KeyPay. KeyPay is an excellent option because KeyPay does enable you to have the SHADS interpretation done on your timesheets. So essentially, we send over the shift start and end times, and KeyPay will actually analyze those and create the correct pay based on that. Whereas with Xero and our other integration, which is MyOb, we just send over the total hours of the shifts over to those platforms, and they don't analyze or do any SHADS interpretation. So they're your three options. And when we talk about the timesheet report and going through it, the first thing you want to make sure is that in the settings area, so on the left-hand side, go to accounts and settings, make sure that down the bottom here that you do have the correct payroll software selected. So you can click edit and you can choose the payroll system that you want. I'm going to leave it on Xero today, but yeah, that's your first step. The other thing that you want to check while you're in here in the settings area is making sure that your pay run is set to the right period. So clicking on edit here, the first thing you want to do is choose whether it's weekly or fortnightly, and then choosing a date for the first day of the week so it kind of can line up the calendars and everything properly for you. So make sure you've done that as well. That'll make the timesheet report show correctly as well. All right, so we're going to jump straight into the timesheet report. Timesheet report is one of my favorite reports in ShiftCare. You can do a lot there from there. So when you're doing your timesheets, when you come into the report, it's important to remember that when you load the report up, it's always going to load up on this week. A lot of the time when you're doing your payroll and you're processing your payroll, obviously the week's finished and you're looking at last week or last fortnight. So do make sure that you remember to switch that to last week or last fortnight. Essentially what you're looking for when you're doing your timesheets, especially if you've got the Xero integration of these numbers here, it shows you how many shifts each staff member has and whether or not whether you've got any that are left to be approved. So essentially you're really looking for a green tick. It puts a green tick on them when they've got a shift left to be approved. The other information that you'll get on this report here is it's sort of a breakdown of the different time periods that your pay groups have. So that's obviously based off your pay groups. So your pay groups are in account on the left-hand side here, and then pay items, and then pay groups. And so we can see here it's got weekday 12 to 6, 6 to 8, and 8 to 12. And if we go into our pay group here, one of your pay groups is always going to have a blue padlock on it. That's the one that is being used to display those times. So we can see 12 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 12 there. So that's why it's showing that information in there. So we'll jump back into the report. Go to last week again. So you are able to add some columns to these to this report. So on the top right, there's a 3 dots here. You can click on there and you can add things like, I want to see how many sleepovers that employee has had during the week, and maybe mileage as well. And so you can see now that it's got a sleepover and a mileage column there. So that can be kind of handy as well if you're just trying to get a good overview of everything that you can see. That sort of covers the main area. One thing as well that's really important to remember is that this report will only show you a certain number. When you load the report up, it'll only show you 15 records by default. If you have more than 15 employees, recommend strongly changing that. So moving that up to 50 or something like that, because when you do sync or export it to your payroll or download the file, it will only export what it can see. So if there's 2 pages, it won't do the second page. So do make sure you increase that number to do that. Okay, so we're going to look into each individual. So, like I said at the start, you really want to make sure that you've approved all your shifts for the week. It's not required. Like, you can export unapproved shifts, but I think it's always, when I'm training, I always say that it's an important step, because you can look over it and make sure that if there's any issues with the shift, that you've looked at it now, because it's a good opportunity, because usually you'll do your payroll first and you'll do your invoicing after. And so if you do your payroll first, you can look at the shifts and make sure there's no issues with them, and then have them prepared to go into invoicing next. So when we click on a staff member, it brings up all their details, and it shows all the shifts that they've had for that period of time that you're looking at. So on the left here, we've got the date. Next is the shift, and you can actually click on these. So it's a blue clickable link, and it will allow you to look at the shift in detail, just like you do on the scheduler. So you can go and you can see notes and things that have happened on the shifts, and you can also edit the shifts and everything like that from here. So that's really handy. Next, it's got who the client was, and then the price book. So the price book's really handy as well, because, like I say, your next step usually after payroll is invoicing. So it's a good opportunity for you there to look and say, oh, that's got the wrong price book on it. That's not supposed to be group activities. It's supposed to be any other service that you're providing. So yeah, good opportunity there. And of course, if you needed to change the price book, you could just open the shift and edit it from there to change the price book. It'll show you next the start time. So we've got the time of the shift started at 3 p.m. and then the finishing of the shift finished at 8 p.m. for this example. The next time here is after the slash is the clock in and clock out times. So what time did the staff member actually clock in and clock out? And we can see, I've got some examples down here of a couple of shifts that I did actually clock in and clock out of. So this shift was supposed to start at 3 p.m., but I didn't clock in until 4:05. And then the shift was meant to finish at 8 p.m., but I didn't clock out. I clocked out at 4:18. So essentially I only worked 15 minutes according to this. The next columns that we've got is break time. So if you can put in break times into a shift when you're creating it, and it will obviously, that's unpaid breaks. So if you ever do that, if I were to put in a 30-minute break on this shift, it would change the hours to 4.5 hours for that shift, because there's a 30-minute unpaid break. Distance. So if someone adds kilometers to the shift, it will show you the distance there. And then expenses. If a staff member adds expenses to a shift, it will show there. The next column is allowances. So what allowances have you put on those shifts? So it's really easy for you to see if you've added the allowances that you need to add. And then over here, we've got actions. And so when you've approved already, you've got your actions there to tick and say that it's been approved, or you can click on approve to do it. And I'll step through that in a minute. So I guess, the first thing that you need to do, and a decision you need to make when you're looking at a shift, is when I'm approving that shift, am I approving it based on the time of the actual shift? So in this example here, this shift was 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. Am I going to approve to pay them the 5 hours because that's what they were rostered on to do, or am I going to pay them the 15 minutes that I actually worked according to my clock in and clock out times? One thing I really strongly suggest that when you're training your staff, when they're using the app, is to put notes on shifts that can help explain if they did have issues with clocking in or clocking out, or they forgot to clock in or clock out, or something changed, and they can put a note on the shift to explain why, because this black icon over here is actually the notes, and you can actually read the notes on a shift. So for example, a note on here says, oh, I forgot to clock out, had to stay back and worked until 2 p.m. So that would explain what happened with this shift and, what time they actually finished, and you can make changes that you need to do that. So I guess in the very initial choice, when you're looking at this, if you click this approve button here, what you're saying is that you're going to approve the shift based on the clock in and clock out times. So I can see here that the shift says it's 5 hours. If I click approve on this one, that's going to change it to 0.22 hours. And it's done that because I only worked 15 minutes as opposed to, or 13 minutes, as opposed to the actual 5-hour shift. So that's why it's done that. And you can see that the icon is green. It's got a thumbs up and it says approved clock in and clock out times. So that's why it's done that. Now, if you said, well, no, they clocked out accidentally, they actually worked and they clocked in late, I just want to pay them the 5 hours that the shift was, you can absolutely do that. So there's a couple of ways to do it, but one way is to click on the shift itself up here on the left-hand side, go up to more actions, and then click approve timesheet. And so from there, you have the option to say, yes, I want to do the clock in and clock out times, and you can edit them if you like. Or you can just click up here and say, yes, I want to do the scheduled times. It does require a reason. So you just put something in there and then hit on confirm. And so when you approve a shift based on the shift times, it will be an orange thumbs up, and it will have when you mouse over, it says approve schedule times. And we can see now that that's 5 hours. So that's what it's going to send over when you do that. One thing it's really important to understand as well is that approving timesheets, you're talking about approving the timesheets to send over to your payroll system to do your pay. We're not talking about invoicing customers and how much they'll be invoiced for that. So if I were to approve this shift based on the clock in and clock out times, it's going to say it's 0.22 hours and it's going to send that over to my payroll system, but it's still going to invoice the client for the 5 hours for the shift because the shift is still set to be a 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. shift. So if you do need to change your shifts based on the different times that the staff ended up actually working, what you can do is you can click this edit button on the very right-hand side, and you can actually change the shift itself. So I could say here, I want to change this to 3:15 or 3:13 to match how long he actually worked, and then click on update shift time. It's really important that you tick that, and then click submit. And so now I've updated the shift to actually be a 0.22 hours. So that will result in the timesheet being 0.22 hours and also the invoicing being 0.22 hours. So it's really important that you do that. Some people ask about editing the clock in and clock out times. So yes, you can edit the clock in and clock out times through the same period. So you click edit through the same method, you click edit here, and these are the clock in and clock out times. I'm not a massive fan of editing the clock in and clock out times because I think they do form part of the audit and the history of what happened on the shift. But if it was a clear mistake or, you decided you want to update them, there's no dramas with that. You can also add allowances if you forgot to add them in when you were doing them. So you can add mileage or any of the other allowances that you have. You can also edit the mileage here. So if a staff member forgot to put their mileage in, or they put the wrong amount in, maybe they put an extra 0 on the end of it or something like that, you can come in here and edit that and change it. Same with the expense amount as well. So that's kind of a quick way of going down. So I did show you approving the shifts individually for the shift times. And that can be quite slow because you've got to click in here and you've got to go to more actions and go to approve and then change all that and do that. One thing that I do suggest is that you can come down the list and just click the approve buttons on the ones that you want to approve the clock in and clock out times and put the green thumbs up on them, and then leave the ones that you want to leave them as orange. And then down the bottom, there's an approve all button down here. So when you use this, it will only approve the shifts that haven't been approved yet. So if I were to approve these 2 shifts, I could just say approve all scheduled times, and it will approve those 2 shifts with an orange thumbs up. So that's usually the quickest way to go through. One thing as well to be really careful is that this is only showing 10 entries out of 14 for the whole week. So again, you either need to change it to show more entries, or you need to go to the second page. So if I come up here and change it to 25, it's going to show the rest of the week period there. One thing I didn't mention about the clock in and clock out times is that it also has what we call a threshold. So to avoid a lot of the 0.22s and all that kind of stuff, if a staff member clocks in or clocks out within 15 minutes of their actual time, it will round that time. So say the shift start was rostered to start at 3:00, and the staff member clocked in at 3:05. It will just say that they started at 3, even if you approve the clock in time, it rounds it to 3. Now that's actually a setting that you can set. So it's in the settings area. And it's down there where we set the Xero or the payroll software. So it's called this attendance threshold in minutes here. So it's 15 by default. Most clients I find do leave it on 15. Some maybe go to 10. So what essentially it means is that if they're within 15 minutes, it'll round it to that time. So say the shift was 9 a.m. and they clocked in at 8:46, they'll get paid from 9 a.m. If they clocked in at 9:12, they'll get paid from 9 a.m. So yeah, you can set that to what you like. The setting underneath it is actually one of my favorite settings as well. So it says auto approve shift if clock in and clock out was successful. So what that does is if the staff member actually did clock in and clock out within this threshold on both their clock in and their clock out times, it will just auto approve the shift to be based on their clock in and clock out times, which of course rounds anyway to the shift time. And it'll be approved when you come into the report. It's already approved, ready to go. So that's actually a big time saver, because what it really means is that when you come into the timesheet report, you only need to deal with shifts that fell outside of that 15-minute threshold. So the staff member either clocked in and clocked out late or early on some of their shifts. So yeah, I really like that setting. It's worth a bit of a time saver. So hopefully when you come into this report, maybe half or 3/4 of the shifts are already approved because the staff member clocked in and clocked out on time. But I guess that depends how well your staff clock in and clock out, which isn't always great sometimes. Yeah, so I think that really covers most of the session, most of what I wanted to cover today. There are titles up the top here as well that give you totals up the top here. So it shows you the totals. One other thing is when you do, and you may have noticed when I came back into the timesheet report here, that there's a green tick there now. So that's kind of what you're looking for before you send your timesheets over to Xero. I will mention as well that if you set an employee to be a contractor, it won't send over timesheets to Xero. This is only for our Xero integration. So you may have staff that are actually contractors, or maybe they're full-time employees and you don't need timesheets done for them. So you are able to set them to a contractor, which will stop it from sending over timesheets to Xero. The way you do that is to just go to their staff profile. And in their staff profile, there's a section there for employment type. And it's got contractor there. So, and it tells you underneath for Xero users, contractors won't be included when syncing timesheets. Other than that, I won't go through the actual process of syncing the timesheets, because I have covered that in webinars before for Xero and KeyPay, for those two at least. So do check out those webinars if you're looking for that. But look, the short answer is that you click on Sync to Xero and you click Approve Timesheets, because you've gone through and approved the timesheets. And then that will then send and create draft timesheets in the other system. How are we going for questions, Andrew?
Good, Paul. Lots of questions, actually. I've tried to answer most of them as we go. Selwyn asked, can you add an expense column to the timesheet report? I don't think we can do that.
Hey, that's a good question, though. Let's jot that down. Yeah.
We can certainly get that added in, Selwyn, if that's going to be handy. It's our previous timesheet report actually had expenses in it, so I'm not sure why they missed that off this new timesheet report, but we can definitely raise that with the product team.
Some people might be asking or thinking about the public holidays as well, but I actually found out that public holidays will show up if there is a public holiday in that period of time. So if there's any shifts, within that period, public holidays should show up.
Cool. Elena asked also, if you put notes in to the timesheet report, it's going to save that to the client's profile. And they were sort of wanting to separate those notes and not have them included in the actual client's profile. I don't think there's a way around it, but I think Haley mentioned that you can create a private note as well if you did need to enter a note in and you didn't want other staff to look at it or other carers in the field to look at that note. You can add a private note. Unfortunately, I don't think you can add a private note from the timesheet report though.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
But I think you can click on you can probably click on there and add note from here. So it's not too bad.
Yeah. Claire also mentioned, that only national public holidays will show up, not state-based holidays. That's a really good point, Claire. The way the system works is it's based on state-based holidays or not regional. I don't know, I live in Queensland and we have a lot of regional holidays up here. So they do need to be entered in to ShiftCare separately. So just be very aware of that. If you do have any regional holidays, and you need to pay your staff for public holiday rates, that they need to be put into the settings area. Paul will show you where that is now.
Yeah, so you go to settings and it's down the bottom right here. So you can click edit and add one in.
Cool. Janet, hey Janet. Janet's asked, where staff are full-time and you're sending to key pay, how are the times between shifts handled, i.e. travel time? This applies to casual staff. Does there need to be an admin shift or something to cover time that is not actually applied to a client?
Yeah, so I mean, with full-time staff, usually it kind of depends on how you pay your full-time staff in terms of whether or not you do timesheets for full-time staff. A lot of people don't do timesheets for full-time staff because they just get paid for their full-time wage regardless of the hours. But yeah, anyone that you do need timesheets for, yes, you'll need to. So some people will create there's a couple of ways you can handle it. Some people will create a shift that's like a travel shift. So you might put it against a client, like a fake client that you create, a business name or something like that, and then that will be a shift that the staff member gets paid for travel time. The other way that you can do it is you can create allowances. So you can have an allowance for travel time being 30 minutes, and it pays the equivalent of 30 minutes of time to that staff member, and then you add it to the shift. So for an example, if we had Android carer here and we said, okay, this shift here, I wanted to add a payment to, you can click on edit and then you would have an allowance called 30 minutes travel time, and you would add it to the shift and that would then pay them for that 30 minutes travel time.
I think, Janet, for full-time staff, I'm assuming you probably just want to be able to see that travel time on the scheduler and also send that to KeyPay as well. So Paul mentioned the allowance, which works well. If you did want to see that in the roster, as Paul also mentioned, probably the easiest way is to create a travel shift in the scheduler and assign it to a client. Potentially the client can be called travel. That client wouldn't have a price book attached, or it would have a price book with a zero charge, so it wouldn't actually go over to your invoicing. And at least then it's visible on the scheduler. Your rostering team can see that it's a travel shift because the client will be travel time, and that will send the information over to KeyPay based on that shift for the staff member.
I just noticed one thing I forgot to mention as well is a cancelled shift. So we can see here that one of these shifts has been cancelled. There is no approve button or edit button or anything on the right-hand side. It's just there to show you that the shift was cancelled, but it's not part of the timesheet that will be sent over to the system, because when I cancelled it, I chose it to be don't charge the client and don't pay the staff member. The shift's just being cancelled. So yeah, that will show there. If it was cancelled and set to still pay the client, still pay the staff member and charge the client, it just shows like a regular shift that you can approve.
Cool. Zoe has asked, and this does get asked quite a bit, how do we roster respite and overnight support so that the right amount is paid to staff and the right amount is paid to or invoiced to the clients?
Yeah, so essentially with respite, the tricky part is the overnight sleepover shift. And so I guess there's a couple of things. It depends whether the sleepover is active or just a sleepover, an active sleepover or sleeping. So definitely what you want to do is you want to split those shifts up. So you should have a shift for the shift before the sleepover, and then the shift will finish at 10 p.m. and then the 10 or 11 p.m., whichever you do. And then the sleepover will start and go till 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning, and you'll add the sleepover allowance to that shift. And then the rest of the shift in the morning. You do need to be mindful of how you set up your so there's a couple of settings on how it works on what. So when we look at the timesheet report, and we can see here it's assigning hours to the different periods throughout the day. So it says here that 15.5 hours on the 8 p.m. to midnight time period there. So the way it works out where it's assigning the hours is based on a setting that you set in the system settings, based on here. So there says here, pay rate is based on the end time. So end time is what most people will do. So what it does is it looks at a shift and it looks at the last hour of the shift, and it will say, okay, the last hour was in this time period, so therefore the whole shift is paid at that time period. Now for afternoon hours, so from the 8 p.m. to midnight, that's fine because SHADS is written that way. If a shift finishes between 8 p.m. and midnight, the whole shift has to be paid at that higher rate. And also the invoice settings will have the same setting, so the whole shift will be paid at the higher rate as well. So it will be invoiced, at the higher rate. Now, the where you can get into trouble though is where a shift finishes, maybe an active overnight shift that finishes at say 7 o'clock in the morning, and you've got your ordinary hours set to be from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Because that shift is finishing in the ordinary hours, it puts the whole shift into ordinary hours, and so you just need to be really mindful of that and look at your pay groups. What I generally recommend there is that if you do have shifts that go early in the morning and you need to pay night rates on them, you can change the start time of the ordinary hours to be 8 a.m. instead, because it's only ever looking at the last hour of the shift. So it doesn't really matter when the shift starts, it matters when it finishes. And so you could move those times around a bit, and then that would then kick in if the shift finishes at 8 a.m, it would be classed as a night shift to pay them the full rate. The other thing that you can do if you do have shifts either side of the sleepover is you can create other pay groups where the whole thing is not, you can call so you might call the pay group, instead of gobbledygook, you might call it night rate. And then every single time you'll have it set to this pay item of night hours, and then it doesn't matter what time the shift is, it will always pay that shift at night rate. And on each shift you can actually specify the rate of the shift individually if you need to. So usually it's set to just be using the staff member's default pay group, but you can actually edit it and say, I want to pay that shift at the night rate. And so that will make sure that shift, when it goes over, is paid at the night rate for that shift.
It might actually be worthwhile doing a separate webinar, Paul, on this, because this does get asked quite a bit. It is quite a complex thing to set up. So it might be worth Zoe setting up another webinar, and we can go through this in a lot more detail. I think it'd be extremely worthwhile because it is quite a complex.
Yeah, I think, and the struggle can be that a lot of businesses every business is a bit different. So it's really hard for me to give like generic advice on a webinar, but I'm definitely happy for you to reach out and we can have a session where I'll look at your specific requirements and see what we can do for you.
Yeah, Diane Davidson's asked, if a shift is cancelled and the staff is paid, can they work another shift at the same time and also be paid for that?
So, they wouldn't get paid. So, the SHADS award allows you to move them on to another shift to make up the time. So what you would do is, if you're planning when you cancel the shift on moving that staff member to another shift, you would move the staff member off that shift first. And generally, I recommend having a no access staff called cancelled shift, and you would put the staff member as cancelled shift on the shift that you're cancelling, and then assign that staff member to whichever shift they're going to do in replacement of the one that they're not doing.
Yeah, I think just the way that ShiftCare works, it's to prevent you from double paying your staff, so that it's actually physically impossible to have a staff rostered on for a shift and then have them rostered on for a second shift and paid twice for
Correct.
that shift. Yeah. Emmanuel has asked, could you please provide guidance on the most effective method to incorporate reimbursements, such as when a staff member covers a client-related expense and seeks reimbursement through timesheets into an employee's timesheets, and explain how this information can be subsequently exported to Zero. That might have been
Yep.
covered in our Zero
Yeah, it
webinar, but
probably is. Look, it's pretty easy though, so I can quickly run through that. I said, sorry, excuse me. Essentially, on the app, staff will be able to add an expense on their app, so they can upload an image with that expense. So it might be a photo of the receipt, and then the total amount of the expenses, and then that will be stored against the shift, and then that's also what shows on the timesheet here. So where you see the expense amounts, that is including that. So if we click on that and then we see the expense, so that's the amount that they've entered, and so you can edit that amount or change it if you need to. So let's say I put in here that it's $50, and I add that expense. It's giving me a warning because I haven't added the expense allowance, and it's also I've mucked around with my expenses, so I don't have an allowance for expenses. But essentially, you need to have the allowance of expense or mileage to be able to reimburse. If you don't put a mileage or expense allowance, and there is a mileage or expense on the shift, it'll only get charged to the client. It won't get sent over to Xero or the other systems. Now, when you do add the expense allowance to the shift, it will send it over to the pay item that you have linked to your allowances. So the pay item would be expenses, and then that will be added to their timesheets, and they'll be reimbursed for that money.
hey, Catherine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you? Or
Good, thank
both?
you.
Just a quick question. When I export the mileage, it's coming up as hours in KeyPay. And so then I have to go into each one in KeyPay and just put in that kilometre allowance so that it then transfers okay. But I'm just wondering, because I watched the webinar you did last week, just yesterday, Paul, and you had a zero balance, like it was just a zero. So I couldn't see if yours came up as ours as well.
I'm pretty sure I've tested it with other people and it doesn't come as hours. I think it might show on the timesheet, but when you actually do the pay run, it changes it to kilometers.
Even without it saying, because it didn't come up on mine, it didn't come up with kilometre allowance in KeyPay. Even though it showed as hours, it still didn't have that there. But I've put the code, what I thought was right.
Yeah, so it should be, as long as you're linking it to the pay, to the work type. That's for KeyPay, you use work types, and there should be a work type for the mileage. It should be okay. If you're finding that's not the case, I'm happy to look with you and see if we can work that out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Catherine. Next, we've got Selwyn. Selwyn, I'm just opening your mic up so you can have a chat to Paul.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hey, Selwyn.
Great, thank you. I would like to see let's take the first entry you got there, 29th of May. All that information, can you show me how it's linked to the pay side, please?
So it's really based on like the pay groups. So and again, it depends on which integration you're using. Which integration are you planning on using?
Well, that was my next question. Was I'm not really sure what you call it, but your pay application, for payroll, etc. That's a seamless link to your own proprietary reporting for payroll, and then I presume that is then linked to my accounting system, for example, Xero or MyOb or whatever.
Correct. So yeah, this timesheet report is within ShiftCare, and then you export that either with Xero, it goes through API, or with the other ones, it exports a file that you send to the other platforms.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so depending on, so with Xero, the way it works is it's through pay groups, but with KeyPay, it's with shift types. So it kind of depends on which payroll system you're using. But with Xero, it goes by pay items. So what happens is each of your times, so let's say this is ordinary hours between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m., I've linked it to the Xero pay item called ordinary hours. So that's actually, we've gotten that information from Xero to link that to a pay item.
Okay. Okay.
And then that's what that shift that we were looking at would probably send to. I can't remember what time that shift was. Let's have a quick look again. So this shift is 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. So because that's finishing at 8 p.m., this would be an ordinary hours shift. So it would be 5 hours that would go against that ordinary hours pay group, pay item.
Does it give me an indication that it is normal hours?
Only from the only from this page where it gives you the totals, so that this is showing you that there's 16 hours of ordinary hours in there. When you're actually in the shift itself, it doesn't say that it's ordinary hours on there.
Okay, so if it's not ordinary hours,
but it's kind of irrelevant, I guess, because at the end of the day, it is what it is. Like you're approving it based on the shift times or the clock in and clock out times, and the system will just assign it to the correct one.
I think that's answered my questions.
Cool, no worries.
Thanks, Owen. Cheers, mate. Peter Marshman, hello, mate. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to hear.
Just that problem with the kilometres going across. I use Xero, and it always converts it to hours. Just adds the hours in. So if they work 10 hours, did 10 kilometres, it comes up as 20 hours in Xero.
Yeah.
I change that.
Yes.
Change that. Sorry.
Yeah. So the reason why we do that is because Xero only allows us to send. So Xero have an API system that allows us to create timesheets in Xero, and they take timesheets very literally. So timesheets can only have time items on them. So we have to name the kilometers as a unit of hours. So even though it shows as hours, the unit per hour is still the rate per kilometer. So even though it shows as hours, it's still the right dollar amount. But we have no way of working around that, fortunately.
Okay, so I have a third party that does the pay slips. So are they, and they just log into my Xero.
Right.
So is that going to come through with the right information for them to be able to do the kilometres as separate reimbursement?
It won't be, so it'll be done as a pay item on the timesheets. If you guys want it to be a separate using the reimbursement side of Xero, they would have to edit or modify the pay run when they're doing it to remove the kilometers that we put on there and add the reimbursement kilometers on instead.
Okay,
cool.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Peter. All right, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks all.